Hello, men. You use auto pay for anything, like a monthly bill or a monthly donation or anything? When we were under shelter at home orders during the pandemic, I found myself watching documentaries, and the kids were watching educational TV because they weren't in school during the day. And so we began to make a donation to PBS because they've got good documentaries and good educational programs. And if you make a monthly donation, then you get access to the archives of all of their shows. And so we began to make a monthly donation to PBS, and we set it up with autopay. Now, even though I haven't gone on to the PBS website to watch a documentary, and the kids haven't used it for educational programs for a while, we are still on that auto pay for a PBS monthly donation. You know what? In some ways, it's kind of silly for us to do that because we're not taking advantage of it now, but we just do it because it's a mindless donation. We don't have to do anything; it just automatically comes out. Sometimes we can treat our marriages, for those of us who are married, like auto pay. It's just kind of there. It happens. Not we don't have any intentionality to it, uh, but we're just kind of going through the motions, and we hope it all works out in the end. Now I know none of us would say that that is completely true. We're putting in some effort, but I think there are times where we're not as intentional as we should be if we are really to be faithful to our wives. We're so busy, we just want to come home and rest. And I get that. Uh, we've been together with our wife perhaps for so long that just a little bit of us takes her for granted, just a little bit. I bring this to mind because I want to confront this head on, brothers. If we are going to be uh, faithful to the Lord, it means that we are going to be faithful to our wives. In 1 Timothy 3:2, and we started looking at this last week, it says that an overseer and anyone who has responsibility, an overseer is to be above reproach. We talked about that last week. And now the second thing in this list in 2 Timothy 3 is an overseer is to be faithful to his wife. What does it really mean to be faithful to your wife? Sometimes we just think of the negative. It means don't have an affair. Well, duh, obviously it means that, but it's more than that. There's not only a negative aspect, there's a positive active aspect. We are proactive to sincerely, regularly, mindfully love our wives, to care and support them. Not like an auto pay of a mindlessness, but an intentionality of seeking to love and care for our wives well. Now, I want to give you four pieces of advice of how to do that. Intentionally, regularly, mindfully loving your wife, being faithful to your wife. The first thing I would advise you to do is have regular dates with your wife. A date shows a, a care, a pursuit of your wife, that you don't just take her for granted, but that she is important. A date means that you go out and get a bite to eat together and you look at each other and you really talk to one another. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it does take intentionality. You have to tell her, hey, let's go out. We're going to set aside this time to do it. Maybe it means even getting a babysitter. But you set aside the time. Chelsea gets an hour long lunch break for her work, and so on my day off, we go and get a lunch date. And that's been wonderful for us. I think it means a lot to her. It shows faithfulness to her. The second thing is join a life group together. I don't know. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining why this is so very important. There's a lot of reasons, but when you are growing together spiritually in a life group, it will tie you and connect you to you and your wife together more. And so it's the support group. It's the sharing of prayer requests. It's the studying of the Bible together. But it is such a wonderful thing for you to be faithful to your wife by saying, "Hey, let's make this a priority. Let's be in a life group together." The third piece of advice that I would give is have regular spiritual check-ins. Chelsea and I got a little book called A Little God Time for Couples. And it gives a verse for the day, and it has a devotion, and then it has a couple application questions. This has kind of become our spiritual check-in with one another. How are you doing? How are you doing spiritually? How are we doing as a couple? How are we doing in our marriage? It's so good. Now I'll admit we don't do it every day. We probably end up doing it about 3 times a week. But that has been enough for us to have those spiritual check-ins. That's another step of intentionality to be faithful to your wife. And the fourth piece of advice is face conflict and difficulties head on. To be a man as a husband means that you don't sweep arguments and conflict under the rug, which sometimes it's easier to do just to avoid. But we must step up. If we're to be faithful to our wives, it means we love them well enough to say, let's deal with this. Ephesians 4:26 and 27 says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So in other words, deal with your conflict head on. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Now that doesn't mean you're going to have every conflict solved by the time you go to bed. Having the conflict solved is different than dealing with your anger. You want to be able to talk and love your wife enough so that you can, at least at the end of the night, say, maybe we haven't resolved the conflict, but we're not angry with one another. You can honestly give your wife a kiss and go to bed with a little bit of peace in your heart. That's so very important for you to be faithful to your wife, is to love her enough to say, let's talk about what we're not seeing things eye to eye on. Now, over time, God will help you, but if you don't do that, then as it says, you'll give the devil a foothold. He'll get into your marriage, and he'll begin to drive a wedge between you. Brothers, I really want us all to be faithful to our wives. If God has given you a wife, that's a blessing. Be faithful to your wife. Now, that means intentionality. That means mindfulness. To love and care for your wife well. So my 4 pieces of advice for today are: have dates, be in a life group, have spiritual check-ins, and deal with the conflict. I love you guys. I hope that you're having a great week. I'm praying for you. God bless you, and I hope to see you on Sunday.